Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland, ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, former lead House impeachment manager in Donald Trump's second impeachment trial, and author of Unthinkable: Trauma, Truth, and the Trials of American Democracy. Congressman Raskin, thank you very much for coming to the Saturday show. Your reaction to this story and Justice Alito's response.
Well, Justice Alito's response makes it clear he understands that it was a political symbol to turn the American flag upside down. It's a universal symbol of political distress, and in this case, of specific opposition to the inauguration of Joe Biden. It's what the MAGA right was calling for at that point. If it were not a very clear political symbol whose meaning is well understood, Justice Alito would not have gone to great pains to blame everything on his wife. In any event, the U.S. Supreme Court is the only court in the federal judiciary, indeed the only court in the land, that does not have a binding ethics code where you could actually go and complain to some tribunal about what's happening. And what we need is to have, at the very least, an ethics panel of federal circuit judges from around the country who we can bring complaints to of bias in the event, in the very likely event that Justice Alito does not decide to heed the calls to recuse himself from this case. But it's a very clear conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm. And what you're talking about, is that a provision or provisions in the Judicial Ethics Enforcement Act of 2024 that you and your Democratic colleagues introduced in committee? I'm just wondering, one, how would that act hold justices accountable? And has the bill even had a committee hearing yet?
Well, no. Under the Republicans, there have been no hearings on any of the ethics reform legislation pertaining to the Supreme Court. But yes, that is a provision, and it's one of the very strong ideas we have. I mean, another possibility is to create an inspector general for the U.S. Supreme Court to be reviewing all of the very inadequate financial disclosures, the travel, the junkets, the money gifts. Look, if you're in the U.S. House of Representatives or you're from the U.S. Senate, members don't even go to Starbucks and accept free coffee from a lobbyist. But if you're on the Supreme Court, there are members taking automobiles, stagecoaches, private school tuition for family members. They're helping to pay for family members' property. It's like, the billionaire sugar daddies who are in that Federalist Society ecosystem are able to fasten on to particular justices. And, the ethical temperature there has just plummeted. So, as the Supreme Court jurisprudence drives to the right, the specific members get more and more lax, both about their own political commitments, but also their own financial entanglements with the billionaire class.
And so then I would take it that the answer to my question, should Justice Alito and for that matter, Justice Thomas, should they recuse themselves from election 2020 related cases? Your answer would be yes.
Well, of course they should. But, as we were just saying, the House of Representatives is not doing anything to try to improve the situation. They are protecting the chaos and the ethical collapse of the Supreme Court. So we're going to have to try to deal with this through elections and the assertion of popular power, because we have a completely corrupt governing class going right up to the Supreme Court.
Okay, Congressman Raskin, we have to talk about the chaos that erupted on Thursday that you were smack in the middle of, as we saw in the opening at the House Oversight and Accountability Committee markup on the resolution to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt. Let's watch another piece of it. Watch this.
Do you know what we're here for? You know we're here about AG.
I don't think you know what you're here for.
Well, you the one talking about.
I think your fake eyelashes are messing up.
No, ain't nothing.
Hold on.
Listen.
Order. Mr. Chairman,
that's beneath even your history.
Regain order of your committee. Order.
I do have a point of order, and I would like to move to take down Ms. Green's words. That is absolutely unacceptable. How dare you attack the physical appearance of another person?
Are your feelings hurt?
Her words down.
Aw.
Oh, girl, baby girl.
Oh, really?
Don't even play.
Okay, for folks who don't know, when you hear a woman of color proceed anything with baby girl, you better run. Congressman Raskin, you said in that clip, quote, "That's beneath even you, Ms. Green." How shocked were you by this behavior?
Well, look, the thing about discussion in a parliamentary body, which is by definition filled with a lot of emotion and passion, is you can talk about substance, you can talk about process, you can invoke science, you can invoke culture, you can invoke literature. The one thing that you cannot do is to engage in ad hominem personal attacks. You cannot insult someone's looks in the United States House of Representatives. So the Democrats moved, the vice-ranking member of the committee, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, moved immediately to have her words taken down. And the chair of the committee did not have the moral authority or the leadership within his own ranks to be able to do it because they're all afraid of Marjorie Taylor Greene. And she basically, is constantly threatening that she's going to turn her millions of Twitter followers on anybody who gets in her way. So they refused to take her words down and to keep her from speaking for the rest of the hearing. I told the chairman, if you allow it to go down the road of personal insults and ad hominem attacks, and I've never seen a chair allow that to happen, there will be no end to it. We will dissolve into chaos. And of course we did.
Congressman, real quick, one last question. That committee meeting was actually postponed from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. so that Republican committee members could attend Donald Trump's New York trial. How did you feel about that?
Terrible. I mean, it was supposed to be set for 11 a.m. They changed it in the middle of the night, so everybody's schedules were thrown into chaos. But they skipped out on their actual legislative duties. A number of them missed votes on the floor of the House of Representatives. And they came back, and it was just a frat house atmosphere. And all they really wanted to do was to provoke and taunt our members. And Marjorie Taylor Greene obviously was the lead in doing that. And one member of their side, to her credit, Lauren Boebert, voted with us not to allow Marjorie Taylor Greene to persist in her antics and her provocations. And so good for Lauren Boebert that she at least was able to stand up for the rules of the House of Representatives. But Marjorie Taylor Greene now is like Donald Trump in that she's lawless, she's incorrigible, she's provocative. All she wants is the limelight, and they refuse to deal with that problem. They will not curb her in any way.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, thank you very much for coming to the Saturday show.
Donald Trump lost 2 debates to me in 2020. And since then, he hadn't shown up for debate. Now he's acting like he wants to debate me again. Well, make my day, pal. I'll even do it twice. So let's pick the dates, Donald. I hear you're free on Wednesdays.
The shade. That was President Biden earlier this week calling Donald Trump's bluff by agreeing to debate him not once but twice. The Biden and Trump campaigns opted to bypass the Commission on Presidential Debates and privately agreed to a debate hosted by CNN on June 27th and another hosted by ABC News on September 10th. Trump then demanded that Biden attend 2 additional debates, but the president refused, saying, quote, "The debate about debates is over." At an event in Minnesota last night, Trump also demanded that President Biden agree to a drug test before the first debate. This is a follow-up on Trump's completely baseless claims that Biden used drugs for his State of the Union address. You go first, Donald. Joining me now, Olivia Troy, former top aide to former Vice President Mike Pence, and that's Olivia, and Amisha Cross, Democratic strategist and former Obama campaign advisor. Thank you both very much for coming to the Saturday show. So, Olivia, do you think Trump will actually show up to either debate?
I think it's a 50-50 shot. I think he will keep us guessing. I think that he will tease it out until the very end. And I think until he actually walks through that door, I mean, there's no telling what he'll do.
Mm-hmm. And, the first debate will come before either party's nominating conventions. And then the second debate will come before early voting begins. Isn't this actually better for voters?
Well, I think so, because I say give him all the runway. Give Donald Trump plenty of runway so that he can show his true colors again and remind the American people of what a Trump presidency would look like, because that's what you're going to get. I think, and I think it's an opportunity for Joe Biden to shine, to talk about his policies, to talk about what he has planned for the next 4 years, and let Trump, go off about whatever he's going to say about squirrels and rigged and stolen elections and witch hunts and whatever else he's going to throw at us. And
Hannibal Lecter?
Yeah.
Hannibal Lecter. Right. I see you nodding real quickly. What do you want to add to this before I ask you about something else?
Well, I just think that I agree with you. I think that this is actually a very good thing for voters because, quite frankly, it gives them ahead of early voting a chance to really understand, what the policy platforms are, but also gives Trump a chance to hang himself. But in addition to that, it puts what matters to the American people on Front Street before they've actually cast their votes. I think that this is a great calendar, and I don't know why the Presidential Debate Commission didn't think of this type of thing before.
All right. So, Amisha, tonight at Trump's addressing the NRA convention, and he attacked Democrats, President Biden, and President Biden's speaking skills. Watch this.
They're going to do a Zoom convention, I hear, because they're blaming the pickets, the riots, whatever they might want to blame. The real problem is he doesn't want to get up and speak. He doesn't want to walk. He can't walk from that stair to this podium. He can't put two sentences together.
All right, Amisha, that was so much projection going on in what Trump was saying. But when preparing for a debate, shouldn't he be, don't you usually downplay your own skills before a debate and not the skills of your opponent? Biden will walk on that stage, standing tall and walking with purpose to the podium. He will have totally blown up what Donald Trump has just said there.
No, absolutely. And what Donald Trump is doing is also, in addition to projecting, he is still, quite frankly, butthurt over the State of the Union address. He had him and the Republicans ran such a negative ads, campaign addresses, everything related to that being a failure. And then President Biden came out and, he was a shining star, followed up by a very awful and, quite frankly, creepy Republican response. But here, Donald Trump needs to be mitigating his own disaster. That's what he needs to worry about. Joe Biden can walk, talk, and do policy at the same time. He's in Georgia right now, proving that. He's, circled the country. He's been at the battleground states. He was just in Wisconsin last week. He's getting people fired up. There is nothing that points to this being a moment where he would fall flat. If anything, Donald Trump, who's not a conventional debater, who is not someone who follows any rules anyway, who now will be in a space where moderators will cut off your mic, where there is no audience to get him going. He's the one who's going to have a much tougher time.
Yeah. I was going to ask about RFK Jr., but we don't have time for that. This is for both of you. I want to turn to the Trump criminal trial in New York. And I'm just wondering, do you think the reporting on Trump's court case is having any effect on the electorate? Olivia, you go first.
I would like to see a conviction because I think the voters are kind of watching that and trying to make decisions on that. But honestly, when he goes out and does his press conferences, which I call his political rallies, because that's the only place he can really kind of campaign right now because he's too busy with all the, criminality that he's done throughout his life and being held accountable for it. But I think what I am watching is whether his surrogates and all these people in the Republican Party that have decided that they're so politically craven that they're going to go there and sell their souls to this man, even though they're sitting there embarrassing themselves because they are basically protecting someone who is going under trial for crimes that he has himself done, right? So I'm curious to see how that resonates with Republican voters. Do they like that? Do they like that for the Republican Party? Because I can tell you that as someone who comes from a Republican background, I sure as heck don't, because I think it's just another day of damage to the brand.
And Amisha, what do you think?
I think that there are fewer enlightened Republicans like Olivia Troy than is actually out there voting. But for the general public, for those swing voters, for those undecided voters, I'm not sure that this is necessarily moving them. Now, if we hear in the next couple weeks, possibly shorter, if there is an actual conviction, I think that that could have some leveraging points. But thus far, the majority of Americans have not been following this day by day, and it not being televised, i.e. in the courtroom, I think lost a little bit of its flavor for people. They're more interested in housing costs going up, things, those kitchen table issues, women's reproductive rights. They aren't really following the ins and outs of the courtroom.
And that, because I asked that question because I wondered, will this have the same impact as the January 6th Select Committee hearings did over the course of 10 incredible hearings? And you pointed out a key difference between that and what we're seeing now. The Select Committee was on television. This is not. Olivia Troy, Amisha Cross, thank you both very much for coming to the Saturday show. We're going to have to do this again. Congresswoman Balint, welcome back to the Sunday show. Your reaction to Speaker Johnson not only defending Trump at his criminal trial, but also attacking the criminal justice system.
Oh, it's disgusting, Jonathan. And as you said, we shouldn't be surprised, but I think we all imagine that there will be eventually some bottom. Clearly, we're wrong every time. They just go lower and lower. And as you said, it's shocking to have the Speaker of the House going down to, the courthouse in Manhattan to interfere with a criminal trial. One that is involving election interference, as you said. Yes, it's a porn star hush money trial, but it's also election interference. And to see him there reminds all of us that really he isn't standing for democracy. He isn't standing for the American people. He's standing for one man. This should scare all of us. He is one of the many apologists and enablers that I serve with in Congress right now. And you're right. He is dangerous.
Now, you voted to table Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene's motion to vacate Speaker Johnson from the chair earlier this month. But after you voted to save him, Johnson still went ahead to push messaging bills meant to drive wedges among Democrats and jam them up with voters, including the bill to rebuke President Biden for pausing an arms shipment to Israel. If Speaker Johnson faces another effort to oust him from the position, should he expect your help, Democrats' help, to save him again?
No, he shouldn't expect that. The problem that we have, Jonathan, I think is that there is nobody else in the wings within the Republican conference who currently has the votes to get elected. The Republicans are not willing to enter in a power sharing agreement. So what does that mean? It means another few weeks of utter chaos and dysfunction. We have, real legislation to pass, and we have already wasted so much time this session, not just with chaos and dysfunction, but with ridiculous bills like freedom for refrigerators, those kinds of things. And we, I think, stood strongly against the motion to vacate, specifically, too, because it involved Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a conflict entrepreneur, and there are never any consequences for her behavior. We saw that certainly this week again. And so for me, my vote to table was a rebuke of Marjorie Taylor Greene and the lengths to which she goes to disrupt the work that we're doing or trying to do on behalf of the American people. This is a woman who's brought pornography into her committee. She screams at the president from the well of the House. She wears campaign materials into the House chamber, all violations of House rules. And what does Johnson do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So we should expect that if it comes to another vote to see if we will continue with him as Speaker, he will not have my support.
David Kirkpatrick of The New Yorker asked Speaker Johnson how he would respond if Trump contested the 2024 election results and whether he would again urge Republicans to reject electors if he deemed the state's voting process constitutionally defective. Johnson replied that he would, quote, follow the Constitution. And as David Kirkpatrick points out in that piece, following the Constitution really depends on what the speaker supports. So do you believe him? Do you believe Speaker Johnson when he says he will follow the Constitution when it comes to the legitimacy of the 2024 election?
It's certainly very hard to believe him, given that he also says that he follows the Bible and the teachings of, his his savior, as he has said, Jesus Christ. The fact that he made that a cornerstone, not just of his speech when he became speaker, but we have had to listen to his preaching on other occasions. So no, it's very difficult to believe somebody who is showing up at an election interference trial that involves a porn star and hush money. How can we possibly believe him and take him at his word? It is, as I said, absolutely frightening to serve alongside these apologists and enablers who clearly are not there to work on behalf of the American people. They're there to serve one man, and that is a former President Donald Trump. We've seen this before. This is incredibly dangerous.
Well, and this is my last question for you, Congresswoman, but it gets to what you're just saying, because Speaker Johnson also told Kirkpatrick of The New Yorker that a second Trump term would be like the first, but, quote, on turbo, adding, quote, I think we're going to be right off to the races. And therein lies the danger, right? Johnson would be a Trump enabler and would use Trump to further his own far-right goals.
Absolutely. And so as a gay American myself, this deeply frightens me. It frightens me for all the women across this country who are demanding their reproductive rights back, for all the people on the margins. This is not somebody that we can trust to follow the Constitution or, frankly, to follow his own so-called morality.
Congresswoman Becca Balint, as a gay American, I am right there with you, sister. Congresswoman Becca Balint of Vermont, thank you as always for coming to the Sunday Show.